Thank you for that. I appreciate it very much. Okay, so I shared with you a few weeks ago that Chris Norris and I were having conversations about how to recognize speakers who come to our club from a long distance and come year after year and have been very faithful to come and be part of our group. And we worked with the board, and basically we have made Jenni Carlson an honorary member of our club. And so what that basically means is anytime you're in town on a Thursday at noon, you're welcome to come have lunch with us. We will charge you for your lunch, but you are welcome to come and have lunch with us anytime you want. And so it comes with a certificate. That's the next thing. It comes with a certificate suitable for framing, which I'm sure you'll run home and do. The second thing we did was the founder of Rotary is a man named Paul Harris. And within the Rotary, there is something called a Paul Harris Fellowship. And our board also made you a Paul Harris Fellow, which comes with another certificate suitable for framing and a pin that you can wear anytime you want. And we encourage you to wear it when you come see us. So anyway, welcome to our club. And we're delighted to have you. And all that stuff comes with it. All right.
Chris, our Rotarian of the day.
She's going to go.
Are you sure? You got...
I've been scolded, but she's got it.
Okay. All right. Jenni...
I wasn't scolded. I was given a very fine recommendation.
Jenni is going to introduce herself. Everyone, welcome Jenni Carlson.
Oh, wait, I've got this on. I don't need that mic. Kevin, am I good? Did I hit the button right? Okay. Well, I'm so sorry we don't have anything sports related to talk about. Did they fire anybody today? Yike! I'm Jenni Carlson, sports columnist at the Oklahoman. Last time I came to talk to you, I was not sports columnist at the Oklahoman. I was in my transition period. So a quick rundown. I grew up in the small Kansas town of Clay Center, which is basically Salina, Manhattan adjacent, kind of north central part of the state. For a high school there. Graduated from there, went to the University of Kansas where I got my bachelor's in journalism, graduated on a Sunday. The very next day, on a Monday, I started working at the Kansas City Star, where I covered high school sports for 2 years. And then in the fall of 1999, I migrated south to Oklahoma City, where I went to work for the Oklahoman. Spent the next 24 years working at the Oklahoman as a columnist, primarily in sports. And then I left to start, or to join an internet startup called Sellout Crowd, which did not survive a year, unfortunately. And then I was either unemployed or self-employed for a few months before the Oklahoman took me back and let me rejoin their wonderful sports team there. And I've been there on Tuesday. It will be 1 year back at the Oklahoman, and I'm thrilled to be back at the Oklahoman. So, as I said, lots we can talk about. I will share my initial thoughts about your football program here at Oklahoma State. And then I'm happy to take questions. I would love to answer whatever you might want to ask. But obviously, as this season, after Mike Gundy was nearly fired last offseason, began to unfold, we felt like it was really only a matter of time before he would be fired. It just felt inevitable after, especially the loss to Tulsa. I was at all 3 of the games before Mike was fired. I was at the opener against UT Martin. I went to Oregon. Oregon's very lovely. The 3 hours and 26 minutes of that game were some of the worst football I've ever seen. Then I was also here in Stillwater for the Friday night game against Tulsa. And it just felt like that the program was just not moving in a real positive direction. Just obviously the losses were one thing, but just the overall vibe it just didn't feel great. So we were getting indications that it was going to happen, and people would ask me, I'd run into friends or whatever, and they'd say, well, what do you think? What do you think is going to happen? And I said, I think it's a lot more likely that Mike will be fired before the end of September than he'll last the whole season. Which in college football, obviously, mid-season firings are still a very new thing. It happens in professional sports a lot, but we haven't seen it as often in college athletics. But with the transfer portal, with the name, image, likeness, the revenue sharing, all of the things that are now in play, I think more and more athletic departments feel like the quicker they can start to figure out, especially with football, who to hire, and let them get a staff in place so that they can start recruiting, start going in the portal, start figuring out how they're going to build a team. I think athletic departments feel more and more like that's the course of action that they want to take. But it's still very weird. It still feels very strange for college athletic fans, reporters, like all of us it feels weird. So when it happened on Tuesday, the day after Mike had his weekly press conference, it felt even weirder, I think, because I think a lot of people wondered, well, if you're going to do it, why not do it over the weekend, or why not do it before the Monday press conference? Near as we can tell, it was just a matter of contracts being signed and signed off on and things like that. It wasn't that they didn't know earlier that this was what they wanted to do, but they really needed to get some things lined up before they pulled the trigger on this. So I thought what Chad Weiberg said in the aftermath of the firing was very thoughtful. He basically said, listen, if we get this right, and by doing this now, they really hope it ups their chances to get the next hire right. If we get this right, he basically said, in a year or two, is anybody really going to be looking back and saying, oh, but they fired Gundy on a Tuesday? It's a good point. I mean, at the time, it might have caused a lot of consternation from fans, from watchers and that sort of thing. But I think in the grand scheme of things, the timing is not going to seem as wild or interesting if Oklahoma State goes out and gets a great football coach to take over its program. Obviously, what's happened since then, I mean, Mike Gundy was always the most interesting football coach in college football. I mean, you never knew what he was going to say. You never knew what he was going to do. Some of you as fans would say that's not a great thing, but as a media member, it was always entertaining. We just never quite knew what was going to happen. And when he is fired, you think, well, surely things will quiet down a little bit. Well, instead, we saw an offense be rejuvenated against Baylor. They actually did some things that I thought were pretty impressive, considering that they are still without some pieces because of injury, and obviously all the change that they'd been through in the week. These college guys find out that their coach, that a lot of them, they came to Oklahoma State to play for, wasn't going to be their coach anymore. There's obviously some mental strain that had to happen there. So I think for the coaching staff and for the players to have come out and played well enough to score some points, keep that game close almost through 3 quarters, I thought that was a good sign. Obviously, the defense didn't play well, and then we saw the firing of Todd Grantham. So, Oklahoma State goes from basically firing nobody in football to doing 2 firings in a week. It just feels, again, very odd and sort of out of character. I do think that the era we're in, that's kind of, where things are. You just have to be adaptable, and it might mean that there are going to be more people fired than before. But I do think that Chad Weiberg's record as a hirer, he's made 3 hires as athletic director, women's basketball, men's basketball, and wrestling. Obviously, football is a giant hire. It's the driver of all the revenue and basically, funds the rest of the athletic department. So this is the big one. But I think you can say that his 3 hires have either been grand slams or, solid doubles into the gap. Because all 3 of those coaches have done or look to be on the verge of doing something, fairly good in their sports, have really kind of changed things. I think David Taylor stands as the gold standard among those 3. What he did in wrestling in a year was just, wow. It was big time, taking over for a legend in John Smith, and then getting them back to a level where I think, a program like Penn State, which had been leading the country and sort of running away with things, is now looking and saying, oh gosh, here comes Oklahoma State again. So that was a fantastic hire. So I don't know what way Chad's going to go. He's got a lot of considerations. Does he try to bring in an alum? Everybody loves the idea of Zach Robinson, very talented offensive coordinator in the NFL. Will he want to leave the NFL because he's been a guy that's already been talked about as a potential NFL head coach? Is that something he aspires to? If so, I doubt he would come coach at the college level. But he's also not been a head coach, and he's not been a coach at all at the college level. And so there's a lot of things about him that I love Zach. I think he's a great guy. I think he would probably do well because he's smart and youthful and all the things. But there are some questions, having not been a head coach and not been at the college level, to understand all the ramifications of transfers and NIL and all that sort of stuff. So then the question becomes, do you hire somebody who has head coaching experience at the college level, or do you just try to find sort of best candidate. Maybe it's a coordinator, somebody who doesn't have head coaching experience. I think those are all things that Chad's going to have to figure out. And obviously, I think he wants somebody that makes sense at Oklahoma State. Somebody that's going to come here, maybe not stay forever. I think that's another thing that will be interesting to see. Some of you, if you've been in Oklahoma for a while, you remember the day when Tulsa men's basketball was really, really good, going to the Sweet 16, pushing in the NCAA tournament, and they would roll through coaches like, people bought socks sometimes. It felt like every couple years they had a new coach, but they had Tubby Smith and they had Bill Self and they had these great coaches. But then they decided, we don't want to go hire a new coach every 2 or 3 years. We're going to get somebody who's going to stay a while. And when they did, their program basically, fell. They weren't as good. They never recaptured that. And they're still trying to sort of get back, which at this point, because of the landscape of college athletics, it's going to be really hard to. So my feeling is you might not have another Mike Gundy situation where you've got a 21-year tenure for your head coach at football. That may just not be the reality anymore. But at Oklahoma State, they've obviously shown they can win in football here, and so I think getting back to that level is the aspiration, not necessarily having a coach that stays for 2 decades. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. That's obviously, to me, the biggest question with Oklahoma State football right now is who's the next coach. But I'm also interested to see, can this team be more competitive than they were before Mike was fired? I think last week gave us a sense that yes, but it'll be interesting to see now with a new defensive coordinator. What do they look like on Saturday at Arizona? So lots of intrigue still, which after the way things started, I was a little bit afraid that this season might become very uninteresting very quickly. And instead it's continued, at least from my perspective, to be interesting. You as fans might say, this is crap, but talking about it being interesting. I'm okay with that. But there is some intrigue, some questions that every week we get a little bit more answers, and sometimes we get more questions. So, but yeah, lots going on with Oklahoma State. It's definitely something that I made a lot of trips to Stillwater a couple weeks ago. So I got used to that 35-51 drive. But very interested to see what happens. I do want to take questions. I can keep rambling, but please, let's have some questions. What do y'all want to talk about? I see a hand right here. Oh, nope.
How involved was the Board of Regents in the firing of Mike?
That's a good question. I think that obviously there had to be a sign-off from the regents that this is what they agreed to. But it was, sorry, I'll take a quick aside here. I think one of my biggest questions before the decision to fire Mike was who's going to fire if they fire. Chad Weiberg was working without a contract. The president, Jim Hess, as you all know, is relatively new. So who, and then, the regents and boosters, and who pulls the trigger? If somebody calls a press conference and says, he's fired, who's doing that? So I don't know. I didn't know if it was regents. I didn't know who it would be. So the fact that it was Chad that pulled the trigger, but I mean, as with anything, you've got to have that approval from your Board of Regents. They're going to have to sign on a new coach and all of that. So I don't think it was necessarily that Chad did it in a vacuum, but I also got the feeling, especially after the Tulsa loss, that there were times before, as you all know, that Mike did things that people said, well, he should be fired for that. Whether it was his comments about the fans last year or, a variety of different things. But I think anytime those other previous things happened, it was kind of a split fan base. Some people said, oh, he needs to be fired, and others said, oh, no, we can't fire him. He's been here too long. He's had too much success. I think after the Tulsa loss, the fan base was very united on their belief that it was time to move on. That was my feeling. So regents, fans, boosters, administration, I think everybody sort of said, we got to do something fresh. So I think even if Chad Weiberg, I don't think he had to ask very hard to get approval from the regents. I think they were probably in that group as well. Yeah.
So you've made it sound like Chad Weiberg gets to hire the next football coach. So
yeah.
You're anticipating his contract will be renewed then?
Yeah, that's what we're hearing, and that it's just a matter of time. He said at the press conference the day that he fired Mike that he would be making the hire. So He would not say that he had done his new contract, but I think it's really just a matter of time. That's kind of the impression that we've gotten all along. There's been some conflicting reports that it's not going to happen, that the Regents want change, but everything that our folks who cover the team know is that it wasn't there wasn't sort of a move to oust Chad. So our belief is that yes, it will happen, and I'm not sure what the contract will be. But that's our belief, is that the contract is coming, and that yes, he will lead the charge on the hire. Yeah.
Yeah, Jenny, what are the people you're talking to saying about, or the coaches you're talking to say about the change of the portal, closing it down and making it just once a year, that kind of thing? How do you think that'll affect college football? What are you hearing from coaches and people in your room?
Yeah, so the transfer portal for football, as it used to be, it used to open basically right after the regular season. So before the conference title games, basically end of the regular season, the next week would be the conference championship games, Big 12, SEC, AC, all that. Before those championship games, the portal would open. So if you had guys on teams playing for conference championships, they might go in the portal. A team that's got a game to play on Saturday might suddenly find that their second string linebacker is suddenly in the portal. So it was a really poorly timed opening of the portal, and it caused a lot of these early season firings and hirings. A couple years ago, everybody remembers, obviously, Lincoln Riley leaves Oklahoma right after they lose the Bedlam game. I know nobody was, lamenting the Bedlam loss for OU, but he leaves right after that. Brian Kelly also leaves Notre Dame for LSU, and Notre Dame had a chance to go to the playoff that year. So it was really weird timing, but those schools felt like they needed to get as quickly into a new staff because of the portal, because they knew that the portal would open. If they wanted to get, those coaches wanted to get good players out of the portal, they needed to go and do it right away. So it was really affecting a lot of things. It left teams without their coach in some instances moving forward. So and then you've got teams preparing for, conference championship games, the playoff, bowl games, all those things. It was really a mess. So they eliminated that early opening. It's going to open later and just be one opening for football. At least that's the plan. The NCAA seems, as Chris and I were talking, for a while the NCAA couldn't lose a court case. Now they can't win a court case. So you never know how that might change. But it does feel like with that later move, it's going to help the coaches not to have to be as focused on the portal while playoffs, conference championship games, bowl games, those sorts of things are happening. And also, it gives colleges a little bit more leeway to not feel like they have to, get a new coaching staff in there right away, even before, some of the season is really over for people. So I think coaches like it. There was a lot going on during December for them, almost to the point that it was untenable. I mean, I just don't think they could manage it all. So I think it's going to help a lot. But I think it's going to help, I think it's going to help the schools. I think it's going to help the players as well. So, oh, yeah.
I was curious. The question that's been roiling around in my mind is, did they have to do the $15 million buyout? Is there any knowledge on that? Or did they negotiate it? And then where does that come from? Did we dip into the NIL money for that 15 in order to guarantee more
does it
NIL money
magically
later?
appear out of thin air? Yes. Where does $15 million come from? So on the negotiation question, to our understanding, there was no talk of negotiating. The thought would be if they negotiated down that buyout, that maybe Mike would stay, coach out the rest of the year. That would sort of be what they would decide. There was no indication. Chad was even asked about whether there was any conversation about that, and he said there was not. I was a little surprised at that, just because $15 million for any athletic department in today's day and age is a lot of money. I mean, basically the revenue sharing money, which has been approved and is now in college sports, that's $20 million a year for the whole school. So you're basically talking about 3/4 of that revenue share money that they just paid. And, oh, by the way, if the new coaching staff comes in and lets go of all the assistants because of the way that last season ended, and with they completely cleaned house in their coaching staff. So they had to go out and hire all new assistants and coordinators. And because of that, to get some people that they thought they wanted, they had to offer them guaranteed 2-year contracts. So they've got almost $9 million in assistant and coordinator contracts that they'll have to pay out if those coaches are not retained by the new staff or the new head coach, which I assume that some of them might be, but probably not all of them. I mean, most head coaches will want to bring in at least a good chunk of their own people to do that. And they've already fired, Todd Grantham, who was, I don't know, I think he was probably $1 million or $2 million probably on his contract. So they're on the hook for, close to $24 million. So where does that come from? Chad Weiberg said it's going to come from their general revenue, their that money pot. So I'm not sure how the assistants and coordinator salaries work, but for Mike, his buyout, they have until the end of 2028 to pay that out. So they could pay that out over the next few years. It won't have to be one lump sum payment of $15 million right now. They can pay that out, what's that, like 3-something a year, which, again, not exactly nothing, but it also means that they don't have to pay out $15 million right now, that they can pay that out over time. Let's see, so 25, 6, 7, 8, 4 years. So 3 and change, 4 and change. Yeah, I mean, it's not nothing, but yeah, so it would definitely, I don't know how, we worked it out over a month, and I think it's like 300 something a month until the end of 2028, 324,000 or something like that. So.
You'll be okay.
Oh, wait.
So, a lot of my friends, a lot more knowledgeable about athletics in general, have speculated that the reason for this 2-year downturn after successful 20-some years was likely due to Gundy's not buying into the whole compensation, pay-to-play, scenario that we've got now.
Yeah.
That he just would like to have stuck to hiring the 3 stars and trying to turn them into a 5-star. Mm-hmm. Do you buy into that, or what do you hear in your circles about what happened so suddenly?
Yeah, I think that he was hesitant at first, probably the first couple years of NIL. I think he was hesitant about it. I think it did put him behind, but I don't think that was the only issue. We've actually thought a lot about this too, as I'm sure you all have. I think part of it was, if you don't blame him, but I think part of the reason was Ollie Gordon was so good in 2023. He covered up a lot of things that might not have been great, like their offensive line. And when all their offensive line said they were coming back, they decided, well, we're going to bring him back and we're going to pay him to come back. And by 2024, opposing defenses have kind of figured out how to take care of handling Ollie better, and their offensive line wasn't nearly as good. Ollie's yards after contact in 2023 were unbelievably high. His number of tackles busted just off the charts. I mean, he is so good, and he was so good in 2023. I think it kind of masked some things, and so then they were behind originally with the NIL, not really buying in, and then they brought back a team, largely an offense, especially last year, that maybe wasn't, well, definitely ended up not being as good as it was in 23, and a good reason for that was Ollie. So it's not, again, not to blame Ollie, because he was really, really good, but that kind of compounded it, and they just kept kind of falling behind. I think it's interesting, though, to look at, like, there are programs, Oklahoma State-esque, that have maneuvered their way through this and are still doing well. Iowa State, still winning a lot of ball games. You look at a place like Indiana, which obviously they're a basketball school. They don't have quite the football pedigree. They're winning games. So it's possible to win games, but I think Oklahoma State, they're working from behind right now with football because of decisions made along the way. It wasn't any one thing. The decision not maybe to do NIL as robustly as they could have hurt them, but it's not the only factor that got them behind. Yeah.
I think number one, you talked about the numbers. I think we're looking at close to 40 million once you get all these buyouts.
Uh-huh.
We're also forgetting last year's staff that
Right.
had 2 years contracts.
Right.
Okay. number one. And then number two, I think Mike, the first year on the NIL, tried to make it even to where his whole team got
Something.
a piece. And obviously that didn't work.
Yeah.
And I think he was trying to be fair to the first string quarterback and the third string center.
Right.
I think the thought process was good. The results, not.
Yeah.
And I can't imagine a locker room where you're sitting there with a left tackle that protects that quarterback, and the quarterback's making $3 million and the left tackle's making $200,000, and he's going to say, "I'm letting this defensive end in next time," and don't think it doesn't happen.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Have you heard anything? OSU had a heck of a recruiting class coming
Right.
that has disintegrated.
Right.
But what it told me was that we all of a sudden got our act together on NIL because we were getting people
Yeah.
that were highly sought at. We were not beating North Texas for these guys.
Right.
Have you heard anything about the amount of money they were throwing out? Because now we have the 20.5 cap.
Right.
I'm assuming football's getting 75 to 80% of that 20.5.
Yeah.
Correct?
Yeah.
What kind of number do you think they're? Have you heard like the Kawan Jones?
Yeah.
Or the Jones?
Yeah. Caden.
Caden
Jones.
Sorry,
yeah.
not
That's
the
all right.
dad.
Key one. Yeah. Right.
And the defensive lineman out of Arkansas that just fell in our lap. And he's between Georgia, Alabama, and so, and then he picks Oklahoma State. That is not because we're not paying.
Right.
There's
exactly.
no doubt in my mind.
Exactly.
And one thing I'm going to go back to is Nick Saban thought, being Nick Saban, he wouldn't have to get real involved with NIL because of how many people he put in the NFL.
Yeah.
I know we're all throwing acronyms around,
That's
but
right.
it backfired.
Right.
It flat didn't happen.
Yeah.
And the guy now is paying the price for it, except he had a heck of a win
He did.
this week.
Yeah.
So it looks like they've got it figured out
Right.
now.
Right.
But you just don't have an idea. I was just wondering if because the numbers have to go down.
Right.
If we're at 20.5 and 80% goes there, there is no way you're paying a quarterback $5 million.
No, and I've not heard any hard and fast numbers that they put towards football away from the revenue sharing. But put that to the side. Any other money. I haven't heard a dollar amount, but it sounded like that was part of the reason why Chad mentioned, I think he said something along the lines of considerable resources or something like that. Considerable resources were put towards this team. So I would assume that puts it above, into the 10 million plus probably. I think that was part of it too. They went out, got players that they thought were good, and then the results weren't there. So I would assume that, and that's probably what they were looking at. So I think that they're probably going to have to be, Mike threw out the number $40 million a year at Oregon that was bannered around. And I think he said something about 7 was what he said for Oklahoma State. So I'm going to assume that they at least doubled that 7 and probably got it around 14. But that's just an educated guess because then to hear Chad talk about considerable resources.
We know the difference between June 30th and July 1st.
Right.
It's a significant difference.
I think Steve Lutz called it the golden hour or something like that, because basically you can do things up to
Midnight of that day.
right at the end of June 30th, and then the new rules kicked in on July 1st and rolled up a bunch more money. So it was kind of this wild stretch of time that they had. It was almost monopoly money, it sounds like they were playing with at the time, which I know for the people giving the money, it's not monopoly money. But, yeah, it's big dollars. And I think, it's probably something along the lines of, again, leaving revenue sharing over here. I think probably something in the $15 to $20 million range for the NIL stuff is probably what they're going to have to have.
Go through a clearinghouse.
Right. All that stuff's got to be cleared. And so
They turned down 10% in August of the 8,300.
yeah.
They turned down 10%
Yeah.
as being outlandish.
Yeah.
Now,
So
I don't know what outlandish is.
yeah, I don't either. But I think for football, I think that's the kind of money you got to be thinking that they're going to have to operate with to get the players that they want to get. So
Jenny.
Am I out of time?
Nope, but I want to end on a high note.
Yeah, let's do
Talk
it.
about something that unites us all.
Let's do
Thunder
it.
basketball. What was that like covering the team last year?
Thunder basketball.
What do you got to look
Woo!
forward to this year?
Oh my gosh, we've already had media day. Practice has already started. Training camp is underway. They're going to have their first preseason game next Tuesday. So it's hard to believe, but the guys in the short pants are back. It was unbelievable covering the championship. I mean, lots of late nights, lots of long days, lots of cross-country trips. But, boy, being in the middle of the biggest story in the sports world was super cool. And to see the way that Oklahoma City reacted, this state reacted to it. If you didn't have a chance to go to a game or be part of it, enjoyed it on TV, I try to get to a game this year. It's just such a fun place to be for basketball. And I'm sure at some point the guys on the team will get old enough to be jaded, but so far they're not. So they're still pretty fun to cover. So it's great. And I wouldn't be surprised if they make another long run. So I'm not making any vacation plans until after about June 22nd. And by the way, if they want to win the title like this season, next season, okay, I'm good with that. If they could just not win the championship in 2028 when we're going to host Olympic sports in Oklahoma City, because I think there's only maybe like 3 weeks break between the end of the NBA Finals and those Olympic competitions, I'd be okay. If they took 2028, went to Bora Bora instead, I'd be fine with that. They'll probably win it all in 28. So, yeah. Thank you all so much. It's always so much fun to come up here.
Thank you so much.